Connor Stalions Gate rolls on. How much do you need to spend on a roster, and why? I saw Kirby Smart at the David Pollock Golf Tournament yesterday, and he was all smiles. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. Rich Rodriguez, once again, the head coach at West Virginia, will join us a little bit later on in the College Game Day podcast. But Pete, let's start with Michigan. Connor Stalions, Sherrone Moore serving a 2-game suspension, but not the first 2 games, which I'm actually glad of. Sherrone needs to be able to go back to Oklahoma where he played as the head coach. I want him to be able to do that. I'm glad that they're kicking the can down the road and doing the suspension for games 3 and 4, it seems. Where do we stand on all of this now? Will this finally bring something close to a resolution, or how close are we to a final resolution of the great Connor Stalions investigation debacle?
It will never ever end, Rece. I think you're well aware of that. This is the football version of the college basketball scandal from 2017.
Great call.
That had the HBO documentary out before everything was resolved legally. Connor Stalions had his Netflix special, his Netflix glow up of himself appear long before this has ended. And this may scare our listeners a little bit, but like the actual clock this could run out would be almost a year from now if you end up with appeals and such. So some of the reporting that came out of the story we broke yesterday about Michigan planning to self-impose 2 games on Sherrone Moore is that the Committee on Fractions hearing on this case is going to be June 6th and 7th in Indianapolis. Now, for the uninitiated for the NCAA process, which if there's a way to make it slower, they find it, is that the Committee on Fractions hearing is not the end. It is really the start of potentially the end. So the Committee on Fractions is going to have to decide whether or not they accept Michigan's self-imposed 2-game suspension, or they could add on to it from there. I do think it was strategically a pinch risky for Michigan to just pick and choose which games they wanted. Now, it's impossible, Rece, and I've said this 1,000 times, to predict how the Committee on Infractions is going to react because they're a committee and that changes constantly and there are different people and these are different cases. You don't tend to self-impose a penalty that's going to be too big, right? Oh, we might get 2 games, let's give it 3. So you tend to go in a little low, hope they meet you there. It's like putting an offer in on a house, right?
And couldn't too, in theory, and again, understanding the glacial pace at which the NCAA handles cases typically and whether they actually have any teeth. If Michigan wants to do this, if Michigan wants Sherrone Moore, and they clearly do, they want him to be able to coach at Oklahoma, because of his personal ties there and optics or whatever reason you might want to say.
Also a pretty big game, by the way. For all the sentimental reasons, like that's a pretty big game on the Michigan schedule.
Fair enough. But, I mean, that's why they're doing it. Otherwise, I mean, Nebraska potentially could be a big game. He's going to miss that one. So, I mean, clearly this is a big reason why. If they want this to happen, it's almost certain they can delay the process, kick the can down the road until they at least get at least past that, one would think, right? Some sort of appeal, new discovery, new this, new that, to try to, if they start to get the sense it's not going to go their way, right?
Yes. And again, the exact timelines of these things, there's a lot of vagaries, but there's a lot of 4 corners in the playbook versus the NCAA. So I can't guarantee that they could do that, Rece, but I think that's certainly in the cards. And so I would say that, what happens June 6th and 7th is going to dictate sort of the timeline of the rest of this. So there'll be a decision then from the committee, usually around 6 weeks. It's somewhere in that neighborhood. So now all of a sudden you're pushing into camping season, but then the appeal would come pretty soon after that. Now, the NCAA, in theory, could expedite that timeline, make a decision soon after, and sort of force Michigan's hand to have to deal with this, in the 2025 season. So, and remember now, this all unfolded in the 2023 season. So it's starting to, the NCAA process has always been too long. It's always been flawed. It's always been difficult. It will be fascinating in the new iteration of what we seem to be heading towards here in college sports, how this is handled. There's going to be some type of CEO czar that's like that's kind of a final say on all these things. Then they'd go to an arbiter for a quick decision if there's pushback in the new iteration of college sports, because they want to avoid this very thing where smart lawyers have probably built a lot of beach houses figuring out ways to manipulate the NCAA for the least amount of pain for their clients. So I say it won't end because, say, Sherrone takes the 2 games. The NCAA decides it's more than that. They appeal. The additionally tacked on games could come in
later
theory, in 2026.
Yeah, but here's the other thing too is, you look at the big picture of Michigan. Few people are going to really be bothered by this, except Ohio State fans and Michigan fans. Michigan fans because they're not going to have their coach at whatever games it's ultimately decided. And Ohio State fans, because they're going to say it's not enough. I mean, you're already seeing this on social media now. When are you guys going to investigate this corrupt school up north that clearly won by nefarious means? But so those are the people who are going to care the most until we get close to the season. And I don't want to dive down into a big rabbit hole of administration. Your journalistic instinct, coincidence or not, that Michigan President Santa Ono is leaving Michigan for Florida, apparently, too, because the reason I even bring up a president is because he was in Harbaugh's corner. He pushed hard. Clearly football was important to him. And now he's leaving. I don't know. I saw some post that he tried to get involved at Harvard and Oxford. It didn't work. And then Florida came with the bigger money and, whatever. I mean, he's like everyone else. He works at the pleasure of his employers. He looked for a better deal, whatever. Does this have anything to do with it? Look, jumping into Florida and stepping into the SEC doesn't exactly make it easier.
It has nothing to do with athletics. It has to do with, and this is from what I read, his handling of the Gaza war. And there's one thing we can assure you about on this podcast: we are not going to dive into the Gaza war.
What is it? Of course, Corso always says, politics, religion, and pass defense. I can go within 2 of the 3. One of them I morally can't shy away from, but the other 2, I think we can probably agree to do that.
Can I throw one more thing on Michigan that I think is interesting, Rece, from like an actual football standpoint?
I'll decide if it's interesting, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is the most interesting part of this next iteration of this with Michigan. So Jim Harbaugh was suspended, NCAA suspension to start 23, 3 games. Remember, they tried to get a negotiated resolution for 4. Nobody agreed. Michigan self-imposed 3. The NCAA, once he left, of course, they suspended him a year. And then the Big Ten suspension, the last 3 games of the year. The key nuance here is that Jim Harbaugh was allowed to coach practice. That has since changed. January of 24, NCAA passed a new rule, which had been proposed before this, that says if you are suspended, you're suspended from all team activities. So I do think one of the reasons why, and this is just an assumption, that Sherrone Moore would want game 3 and 4, not 1 and 2, is if you offered any head coach a chance you could coach practice all week or you can be there on game day, they would choose practice all week over game day every single time. That you can have so much more of an impact on the game by being there all week. And Sherrone Moore not being there all week, I think they would rather sort of have their processes set and have his stamp put on the team the first 2 weeks before then taking 2 weeks off of practice. I just think that's a really important distinction in all this, is that when you tie practice time in, it is a much more punitive punishment than just skipping the day of the game.
Yeah, and that's fair. But we got such great stories from Harbaugh having to skip the day of the game. In fact, when Sherrone also had to skip the day of the game, we learned that Sherrone's wife made some lovely sandwiches for Harbaugh, and that Sherrone Moore had, as Jim called it, the Peacock, so that they could find the game on the Peacock, which Jim said he didn't have the Peacock at his house, so he could not have watched the Michigan game at his house.
That reminded me of my parents trying to find different games and calling me and being like, wait a minute, Syracuse is on the ACC Network Plus tonight. And I'm like,
what service is that? Yeah. I just want to point out that with our affiliation with ACC Network Plus, that should be on every carrier and easily found wherever you like to get your streaming services, cable or satellite providers. And
I just don't want to tell my parents how to find it. That's the only reason I bring it up.
You know, it's come out about the escalated payrolls. What's real? From what is the $35-40 million payrolls real for a handful of schools, half dozen programs?
I mean, we're hearing about $20 million for basketball, Rece. Right.
Well, it's fewer guys, and I think that's real. Although there was one out there, the guy from Arkansas, Boogie Flan, that's coming back, and somebody threw out $7 million, and people sort of poo-pooed that as being ridiculous. But there's a lot of cash going on.
I think there's now the $2 million player is not an anomaly anymore.
Right.
The $2 million player in college basketball is a real thing. I think where some of these numerical totals are coming from is this, and you're seeing it in recruiting. I bring up USC because they have the number one class. I think there's a lot of front loading going on right now, Rece, where if you have the ability to pay high school players, you are doing so now to assure their commitments before the playing field is theoretically even, although it's never going to be even. And God bless the person who's going to try to rein it in and decide who's giving money outside the cap and what is legitimate NIL. And these are all the questions that will be podcast topics until this settlement falls apart somewhere. Hopefully it's 10 years from now, so my hair's not fully gray by then. But the notion of teams getting up into the $30+ million range and sneaking up towards 40, if you think about front loading for this year, if you think about trying to recruit ahead and pay players in the places you can do that, it doesn't take a lot of math to get there. And this is all the classic behavior. The most interesting part to me is this. This is the classic behavior that all of a sudden everyone's expecting to stop. Rules are set, and what are teams doing? Well, when the settlement comes, we need to abide by the rules. We are going to just go 1,000 miles an hour to give ourselves some sort of gray area competitive advantage before that. I'm not saying they're cheating, but I'm saying is rules in college sports, because they were unpaid players for so long, were made to be bent, were made to find workarounds of, and then new rules came and then you found new workarounds. And that's just been the cat and mouse process we've seen in college athletics for, as long as I've done this, probably as long as you've done this. And so it will be interesting to see if all of a sudden that behavior just stops. I'm guessing no.
No, it's not. I can answer that question. That's not going to stop. That's sort of ingrained in the culture. I mean, look, we have 10 billion rules in the tax code, and people find ways around them. Some of them are preposterous, but we're obligated to follow them. Yet there are people who do not, and there are speed limit signs everywhere. People say, it says 35, then we'll stop you at 41, might at 43, not at 41. Everybody's going to go 41. You get on the highway, if one of these great places where it's 70 or 75, you're going to go 84.
America.
Keep it under double digits, and you figure you're going to be okay. That is clearly going to happen whenever they get with the revenue sharing and all of that. It's been interesting to watch different
What's the
coaches.
highest speed limit you've ever seen?
I think I've seen an 80 out west someplace, something like that.
I'm gonna Google this now. I'm curious. I want to say.
I thought there was one in West Texas that was like 80 or 85.
There's an
like
85, a stretch of tollway in exurban areas outside Austin, Texas.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. Which brings me to where I had the pleasure of spending the day yesterday. I'm pretty sure that as our friend David Pollock was making his rounds around the Georgia Club yesterday during his Pollock Family Foundation golf tournament, he was on one of those big gator things, or big four-wheel things, and there was a gentleman with him and who was part of the tournament and someone shooting video, and they looked absolutely petrified because Pollock was ripping through there, probably exceeding any Texas rural interstate speed limit you can imagine, cutting right across the fairway.
That's very easy to imagine David doing that.
Yeah. Just a tremendous event yesterday. Got a chance to chat briefly, albeit briefly, with Kirby Smart. Obviously, had the big commitment yesterday. Played in a group My group was just behind Clemson, young Clemson star linebacker Sammy Brown.
Okay.
Sammy played, and much like meeting a running back in the A gap, when Sammy hits the ball, it stays hit, much like the running back stays hit. I mean, he looks great, very excited about their season. A lot of guys, Marcus Allen was there. I just saw him from a distance. Brian Jordan was there. Jeff Francoeur, who is maybe the biggest Clemson fan on the planet, and one time was headed to Clemson to be a wide receiver before embarking on his major league career. Jake
Probably
Fromm,
made a good decision.
Yeah. Jake Fromm was there. I think Jake's team won yesterday, so I
can see Jake Fromm being a good golfer.
Oh yeah, I think so. But anyway, it was a great day, and nobody wants to hear about playing golf. The only reason I bring it up is because Kirby and being all smiles because he got his quarterback commitment yesterday, which was a pretty big deal in Georgia circles.
Were you there when did you see Kirby okay?
I did not. No, he was very happy. I saw him early in the morning. He was very happy, and then afterwards I found out what had happened, and I'm sure he was just happy to be out on a great day with a lot of great people for a good cause. I'm sure that's true. But as we often say on this podcast, two things can be true. You can also be happy about landing a big time quarterback, right? Yeah. Something we do in the off season quite often is have big name guests join us, particularly coaches, and few have done as much in the game as Rich Rodriguez, 4-time Big East champion, 2-time Big East Coach of the Year in the Pac-12, Coach of the Year in Conference USA, took Arizona to a New Year's Six Bowl, has won 190 games in his career, an innovator of the spread offense, zone reads, and so much of the modern football that you see now. And now back home in West Virginia. We're pleased to be joined by the new, once again, head coach of the Mountaineers, Rich Rodriguez. Rich, great of you to be with us. When you decided to come back, what reservations did you have about returning to West Virginia for a second time?
Good question. I don't know if I had reservations. I kind of had an idea what it would look like. I think it would be a lot of nostalgia, kind of pomp and circumstances at the initial thing, and nothing is better than your opening day, right? Everything's downhill from there. But I think the only part is I wanted everybody to understand that hopefully I've grown, and I'm not the same coach I was back then. I want to be better and try to get that message across. And listen, I'm very grateful to be back, but I'm a better coach. I'm a different coach in a lot of respects, and this is a new era. Things have changed, and hopefully I'm hired not from what happened in the early 2000s, but hopefully what they think can happen in the next few years.
Well, Rich, I think that's an interesting segue to West Virginia's changed a lot, right? I mean, it was a Big East job when you were there. Now it's in the Big 12. College football's changed exponentially. We could do podcasts until 2035 on that. Just how, now that you've been in the chair for 4 or 5 months, just how have you felt this West Virginia job different and changed and evolved?
Yeah, well, the Big 12, I didn't till I got there. So, gee, half these teams are like I was in the Pac-12 with, what I mean? So I know a little bit more about the league maybe than I even thought coming into it, because if you look at the makeup of the league, now everything has changed in college football. We're at such a unique time. I think we'll look back at this, this era, the last few years, and maybe the next year or two. It's like, holy cow, this is kind of unique. But we can sit and complain about it, or we can say, hey, the goalposts have moved. You got to move with it, and that's what I've challenged ourselves to do here in the school. Hey, let's move with it. Football is important here. Athletics is important here. There's no other Power 4 team. There's no NBA, WNBA, NFL, Major League Baseball team. So this is it. West Virginia athletics and West Virginia football is a big deal to the state, and I like it that way. I want that kind of pressure, so-called pressure, put on our program to succeed. But you've got to adapt to it. And I think the biggest thing for us and me personally is we all have to learn how to adapt over the last 20 years. I don't have 28 years of head coaching experience repeated one time. I've 28 years. I think we've gotten better every 28 years, or at least we've tried to anyway.
One of the things I think whenever there's a situation, it's somewhat rare, that a coach goes back to where he's been before. Someone breaks out the old Thomas Wolfe novel that you can't go home again. And that whole book, I don't know how much you know about it, and I'm not going to do a literary class here, but it's about learning about the people, how they've changed while you were gone, and how you changed when you were gone. You mentioned it earlier that you're a different coach. How so? Give me a specific of how this version of Rich Rodriguez is different from 2007.
I think more for me, Rece, it's been the experiences that we've had in different leagues, coaching in different leagues, coaching in different regions of the country, kind of getting to see the personality, not only from a recruiting standpoint, but, how football in general and athletics is viewed in each community. It's a little bit different. Every place, I've always said this, every place has its own strengths and weaknesses. And I think when you go as a coach to different spots, you have to use that as an opportunity to learn that. And what can you learn from? It's like in the same way, things scheme-wise. I mean, offensively, we're doing a lot of stuff that we did back 20 years ago, but there's a lot of stuff that we think is better. And if I see stuff next week or in the next hour or the next day that can help us, it might be better than what we're doing, or somebody's doing it better, then I got to research that and see if we can implement it. So I'm constantly thinking you're always trying to grow. It's like your mind. Once your mind grows to a certain dimension, it never goes back to its original dimension, right? Well, our head's only going to be so big, but our mind can keep growing. That's what I'm trying to do with our staff and our players too.
Rich, you mentioned scheme. Let's take a walk down memory lane of the evolution of offense, which you were at the forefront of. I actually went down a little rabbit hole today, a story I wrote from 2007, from when you were there talking to Jed Drenning from the early 90s, I think, at Glenville, and how some of the zone read stuff sort of accidentally found you. And then I think some of the biggest name coaches, as you had some success at Tulane, Clemson, and then West Virginia as a head coach, started to come find you a little bit, and then everything spread. We can walk us through a little bit of the history of offense that you were at the forefront of, and now that you look back, it has to be pretty fun to have been at the tip of the spear.
Yeah, it all really got started at Glenville State in 1990, and I was a 28-year-old head coach and still trying to figure it out. And I had never coached on offense before. And I just, simplicity, you looked like a fan. Like, if you ever watch a team, they don't do anything offensively until they get in a 2-minute drill, then they go up and down the field. I'm like, what the hell? Why don't we do that from the start? And I had nothing to lose, because the year before, Glenville didn't win a game, and they were shut out 7 times. And so I got a standing ovation on my first play at Glenville State, 13-yard pass. And I was on the headset, and I said, hell, I ain't never leaving. This place is perfect. So we started, back then it was all 2-minute drill, but it was kind of off the run and shoot. But if you remember, the run and shoot started with Warren Moon and those under center, and he'd turn his back on the backside end. That's why he got sacked more than any quarterback in the history of the NFL. So I'm like, what the heck? Let's go in the shotgun so the quarterback can see better. And that was Jed Drenning. Let's go in 2-minute drill because we can control conditioning. I'll get 5 dumpy linemen to get run over slowly, right? And we did that. And the run game kind of came about, a couple of years into it. That started like what everybody started following at West Virginia. But the base of going with the tempo, trying to have conditioning be a factor early in the game, and try to dictate the pace, that part's never changed. The run game has really evolved, with the RPO stuff and all that. And that's been kind of neat, because some people have done it a lot better than we have. So I've tried to copy what they're doing. But it's evolved. But I still believe that football practice in itself, of all the sports, may be the most important kind of practice periods of any sport out there, because it's such a technical game with so many different positions, doing so many different fundamentals, that if you can somehow get your practices to make your team better than somebody else, when it goes to the game, you got a better chance to win. And that's kind of been our philosophy. We don't go long, but when we practice, and people that have been to our practice will say, that's like something different that I've ever seen. And I think it's because of our pace and the intensity which we work every day at.
Pace and intensity in practice, one thing, but defenses have caught up a lot, at least in terms of dealing with, we're just going to try to snap the ball again in 8 seconds before you can get set. Defenses have adjusted to that. So what has been the most significant counter move that you've made since defenses have adjusted to that?
Well, certainly, I think you have to be ready to play a lot of people on both sides. especially on defense, because you will have some quick series. Even if you score quickly, your defense is going to get out there a little bit. And I think that what's changed about us, I've always thought this: if somebody throws for 500 yards on you, that's a bad thing. But you can say, man, they had a great quarterback, great receivers, and all that. But if somebody runs for 500, it takes your soul, your whole program. You want to think about quitting football. You know what I mean? And so the couple of games that we've had that, it was been after the game, the look on the other team's face that when he did that to us, it's almost like they wish they were anywhere else in the world other than there. And so we're like, can we play at that pace in a run game? And you got to have different types of runs that don't have certain man schemes because they're not going to get lined up. So coaches that try to be the smartest guys in the room and say, well, we're going to double team here and then double team this and block that guy here. Well, they're not going to be there if you're going fast all the time because they're getting lined up. So you have to adjust how you do offensively. But defenses have gotten so much smarter. It used to be when you ran a zone read, a defense would fit the run a certain way on the front side, and then on the back side, they would just say, chase the ball, watch the cutback. That's all he did. Well, now they'll fit the front side one way and then fit the back side for the quarterback another way. And so they've been more creative defensively. But I still think pace and tempo is a big thing. The difference for us, and I'm not saying we're that different, I tell our guys, we're going to go as fast as we can, but if we have a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter, we're milking it. We're going to get the win and get out of there. And so we would have been the fastest team in the country the last 3 years, but every one of our fourth quarters we had leads. We're taking it all the way down to 1 second and getting a win and getting out.
Rich, in the throwback nature of some of those conversations we've had, I guess I have a two-part staff question. One is there's some familiar bold-faced names, right? Pat White, Noel Devine, Rasheed Marshall, all on your staff that are linchpins of those glory days at West Virginia. And then there's another nuance where your son, Rece, the quarterback coach, and your daughter, Raquel, seemingly is your technological savior and do-it-all staff member. Just walk through that this iteration, there's so many familiar faces and obviously family involved.
Yeah, it's like with Pat and Rasheed and Noel, I told him, I said, I'm not hiring you because of what you did in the 2000s. I'm hiring you because you can help me win now. The fact is they do have a certain level of respect, I think, from the guys because people know who they are and the players know who they are, recruits know who they are. But I also help that their innate competitiveness, their work ethic and all that was one of the things that was maybe overlooked to their success. I think our current players can see that and recruits can see that now as well. With Rhett, it's kind of unique because he started off in the financial world. And a few years ago, I said, you want to do that or do you want to be coach? And he said, I think I want to coach. But he's a perfect fit for me because, I'm a little loud and out there. And he's the exact opposite. He's calmer, milder. If I was on the headset talking to the quarterbacks, I would never get nothing accomplished. I'd be yelling at them and they'd be yelling back at me and Rhett's like, okay, this is the play. Look for this coverage. He's nice and calm. And so it's a perfect kind of situation where he can offset some of my rant and raving and all that kind of stuff. And then Raquel, it's nice having a family because they've grown up in this. So they've been part of a football program their entire life. So they could kind of almost finish my sentences. It's like Raquel, she probably wouldn't admit it, but if I told her, hey, Raquel, coach these 3 routes for these receivers, she could probably do that. Or Raquel, they're running this defense and they're running a bare front. Well, we got it. She said, well, this is the only 2 plays that are going to work. So she's getting there and done that herself.
Has there been a time that you can think of when you come home after a game, maybe things didn't go the way you'd hoped, and Raquel has said, or Rita or anybody in the family said, hey, why didn't you do this? How do you respond? How do you respond to that? Because I know your family a bit, been fortunate to spend some time around. They're not the shy retiring types. They're not going to hold back on you necessarily.
They're in 100%. Miss Rita, like if she has a box and she has some family and friends that watching the game with her, but she's watching the game. She's not into entertaining people. I mean, she wants to know what's going on third down. And I always tell her, if I call a play and it doesn't work and we win, she'll ask right after the game, like, what are you thinking about this and that? If we lose, she'll wait a week or 2, maybe 2 weeks. I remember doing it with Clemson one time we were playing. I was at Clemson calling plays, and I was with Tommy Bowden, and we were playing Georgia Tech, and it's the fourth quarter. It's like 3rd and 4 or something. Key point, fourth quarter, and I call a reverse, and we lose 3 yards. And then we wind up losing the game. And she waited a few days, and all that. And she said, by the way, that reverse on 3rd down and 4. I said, no, hell, that was the one call I let Tommy make. So, so it was, yeah, they're on top of it. Trust me, they remember everything.
Rich, as you kind of look ahead to this second chapter at West Virginia, I think maybe some people would miss the fact that it's been a little bit of a meandering road back here since you left Arizona in 2017. You're at Ole Miss for a minute. You spent a season at Louisiana Monroe with your son, I believe, playing, and then Jacksonville State. Is there some gratification in the climb back to this moment? As you get here.
Sure, it's been, like you said, I've been all over the country, so to speak. I still have my house in Tucson, and because we loved it out there. But I think we have it because it's up against the mountains, and Miss Rita keeps waiting for Moses to come over the hill at some point. But we feel like we've been our own journey, like you said. Down in the bayou, in the hills of Alabama, out west in the desert, and I think I've tried to learn from each one of those stops. And we've had great relationships, everywhere we've been, so that, I think that's been kind of the neat part about it. And that's, the part about coming back that, we haven't just been in this one little place. And, we certainly have always had West Virginia as our home, but we felt like, as any coach would tell you, you try to make your home wherever you're at. And we tried to do that. And I loved our time at Jack State. I would have been perfectly happy if we stayed at Jack State the rest of my career and I finished it off there in 6, 7, 8 years. I'd have been perfectly happy. And as long as we were winning, right? And we were winning, and there were great people there. But this was different. It was almost an opportunity to maybe try to get a place where you could win it all at a place that's home for us and the people that we love. So yeah, there's no question. It's been an interesting journey, but I am very grateful for an opportunity to come back.
When you decided to come back, at any point, what were your recollections or thoughts about the day you got on the plane to leave, and whether you could have even conceived that it would have come back around this way?
Yeah, if you think back about it, I mean, there was a lot of nasty talks and threats, and family got threats, and it didn't surprise me. At least they got passion, right? But the things that had bothered me was the things that came out that weren't true or factual, and I should have addressed it. I should have had a press conference or something, I think. And this is just my opinion. I should have had a press conference explain this is why I'm leaving. These are the things that concerns I have, or this is the opportunity that we're looking at. And I just kind of wanted to move on, and Michigan had told me to kind of move on. But I still think I don't think about it a lot, but I still have to think about it occasionally to learn from it. Now this is it for me. I'm not obviously, I'm not going to leave this opportunity, but I think I had to learn a lot from that experience, and I think I did learn a lot, not only from a personal standpoint, but what this program had meant to the state of West Virginia. To a lot of people, I'm like, maybe the madder they were, the more upset they were was because we were having success, and we were so close. We were so close to getting it done, and we were close to getting it done. And so maybe that passion was a good thing, not looking at it from a negative standpoint. At least that's trying to look at it from this view now. But, the people have been real nice, and there's been a few. I think there was as soon as I had my opening press conference, somebody let a Pitt fan in the Coliseum, and he had to say something nasty as soon as I got introduced. But they shut that down. But and then on our little tour right now, seeing our donors, there's been a couple comments here and there, but overwhelmingly been really, really positive, which makes me feel so grateful.
There's a lot of what if games people have played over the years, Rich, with your acceptance and then return from the Alabama job. And then if you did or didn't go to Michigan, and if you had stayed, I always remember, just from covering it from the grassroots, one of the most interesting aspects was the recruitment of Terrelle Pryor. Because he was right in the middle. I even remember there were stories about you calling like your voicemail to see if like Terrelle Pryor had called, because people get your phone records. It was a thing to those that didn't live it. Do you think if you had stayed, Terrelle Pryor would have been a West Virginia Mountaineer?
Oh boy, I really hadn't thought that much about that, but I think there still would have been a hard get a little bit, because Ohio State was, obviously they had a big brand. I think our style of play and what Pat was doing drew a lot of his interest, and I think it would have been phenomenal, of course, in that. We tried to get him in Michigan because they had all the quarterbacks had left there. So, I do think one thing I do think about what's interesting is what if these rules that we had today were in place back then when all the coaches changed. I said that would have been an interesting seeing what would have happened, not just for my move, but for all the coaches' moves because back then nobody was transferring because you didn't have this open portal periods and all that kind of stuff. So I'm thinking, boy, if that would have happened, you talk about a lot of upset fans if people would have left there. And I don't know if guys would have followed me from West Virginia, Michigan, or what have you, but it's a whole different dynamic now. And I think there's probably, less, I don't want to say less hard feelings, because when coaches leave, people still get upset if you're having success. When players leave, they still get upset. But there's, I think, more of an acceptance of the free market kind of deal than maybe there was back then.
Nobody would have cared about Terrelle's tattoos, that's for sure. If we had the rules back then. I read something interesting recently that with a lot of the coaches, and Pete and I talked to a lot of them, most of them unhappy about the portal, the NIL, not because they begrudge the players making money, but because of the uncertainty surrounding your roster. And Dan Lanning, for one, has said, look, you might as well embrace it and be positive about it and look at it as a positive, a way to incentivize talent acquisition or however you might phrase it. And I know there are some skeptics and cynics who would say, well, of course he can say that given, the benefactor at Oregon. How do you look at it, Rich, in terms of making sure that when you're in the business of trying to get players to West Virginia, that you get the right kind of guys, but you're also understanding what needs to happen for them financially in order to be competitive and to win at the highest level?
Yeah, the goalposts have certainly moved a long way, and you have to adapt to it. You just throw your hands up, and so obviously some of it, I don't think any coach, if they were being honest, would say this is really hard to build a program when you have open free agency every year. The NIL and the paying them is one part. It's like the NFL on steroids, but the biggest part is the open free agency. There's no rookie salary cap. There's no 3-year contracts, and that makes it really, really difficult. But that is what it is, So you have to, okay, how do I adjust to this new thing and still have the right culture? Everybody uses that word, culture, but do they live it every day? Do they adhere to it in the way they go acquire players, develop players, build their roster? And that's one thing I said from the start. I said, we're going to be okay in the rev share world. We're not going to have in the pre-rev share all the money maybe somebody else does, but we can still have the best culture. And you have to adhere to that, and you have to be disciplined enough that this is how you're going to pay your guys. This is how you're going to run your team. This is your salary cap. And everybody's got to understand that. You got to be open and honest with your players. And we've done that. We've tried to do that in the last 4 or 5 months. And that way our culture is going to be set for not just now, but next year and the year after that.
Rich, we talked a little bit about what your scheme identity is going to be. We haven't talked a lot about personnel of the 2025 Mountaineers. Nico Marchiol is a guy we got familiar with as he did some spot starts last year. He was a big recruit when he landed there. Jaheim White's a very productive player who I think could really be interesting in your system. What do you think of some of the identity? Who are some of the faces of the Mountaineers for 2025?
Yeah, there's not many. There's 2 guys that have started total and the whole team, and I think out of a 105-man roster, if that's what it gets to, I think 75 of them are going to be new.
Wow.
That's really daunting if they were all going to be freshmen, but now obviously all the new guys some of those are a handful of them are 6-month guys that are seniors. So it's a completely new roster. None of them have played for us other than 2 guys. And so we have a lot of question marks, but again, that's, we get a little chance to work with them a little bit in the summer. Then August is going to be important. So I'm hoping that like at Jack State last year, we had 65 of our roster was new. And it took us a couple games. First couple games of the season, we weren't very good. And then we won 8 in a row and won the league. And so it took us a little longer than I wanted. I'm hoping it doesn't happen here. But it is different. And you have to coach different. I tell our coaches, we got to be freshman friendly, from our scheme standpoint. We can't have last thing I would want to do is have a guy that's talented enough to help us win standing next to me on the sideline because he don't know what the hell to do. That ain't his fault. That's our fault. And so as coaches, sometimes we come up with all this fancy stuff and your guys don't have time to learn how to do it the right way. And I always said, it's not what you call, it's what you can execute. Now, if you can execute a lot well, boy, you got the best of all worlds. But that's the key there.
What constitutes success then in year one? How will you define that first year we're off to a great start? This was a successful season.
I guess I've gotten too old, Rece, to have coach speak anymore. I'm just like, if we're not playing, if we're not in contention in November for the conference championship, then I think it's not a good year. Now, will that lead to a bowl game and winning a bowl game and all that? But every year our first goal is to win the league. Now, if you win the league, you're going to be in a playoff, right? So, that's going to be a goal as well, but that goes along with it. But, I saw Arizona State do it last year. And I know it was Kenny's second year, but they went from down the bottom to the top. Now, can we do that in 1 year, not 2 years? That's a harder ask to do, but certainly that'll be our focus.
The whole thing in that league is to win the close games. I mean, you look the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, Oklahoma State won them, then they didn't. Good when they did, bad when they didn't. And Arizona State won close games last year. That's the whole key, it seems, because it's a very competitive, very good, but balanced conference.
And that's always going to be the case, I think, going forward in our league. And we're going to have some overtime games. I've been fortunate in overtime. We always think that in overtime, the best conditioned team maybe win. And we think we're going to be that, but that's, there's going to be I hope there's a bunch of close ones. That means we've gotten better than we did, by the end of spring ball. So we'll see.
Well, if there's close ones, you're going to need a good kicker, which leads me to the obvious question. One of your former players is one of our current teammates on ESPN GameDay, Pat McAfee. He's obviously a gifted talent. He was for you, and he is for us.
Being a kicker. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. He brings a unique energy, unlike anyone I've been around, Rich. I'm just curious, he's told us a story about Tony Gibson going to recruit him from outside Pittsburgh. When he got there, when did you realize, this guy's wired a little different?
Well, the first day when I heard it, because Pat, I believe, was the first specialist we ever put on scholarship before he enrolled, because he was that good. But I can remember they said, hey, you can come watch Pat kick. You could hear him kick. That's what made a difference, because there was a certain sound that came off his foot when he kicked the ball. It was a certain thump. So I can remember walking out and said, what the heck? And that was him kicking the ball. And, I always see, and he was touted, obviously, as a punter, as a kicker, the best that's ever played here, and had a great personality. But I do remember, I think I quit checking his curfew because I was afraid what I'd find out. So I think I told him, as long as you keep making kicks and putting the ball great, I won't check your curfew. But we can't have anybody arrested or anything like that. That would be a tough time. I think it was him or somebody else that asked me one time about our special teams playbook, and I said it's got 2 pages. Page 1, make the damn kick. Page 2, period. That's it. I don't want to complicate things, but Pat, I was really proud of Pat, and I was proud. People don't realize how hard he works, and he had that same work ethic here. He worked. I mean, if I wanted a special, I think one of the best things he was good at was obviously the kicks and the punts. But he could make those special kickoffs, the little pooch kick and all that. He was as good as anybody I've ever seen doing that, too. And that's just work ethic. He worked on it all the time. But, yeah, he's doing well. Proud of him.
Yeah, he was a huge advocate for you returning, as you know. And he's been very supportive of the entire program. And if he calls you up after this podcast and he said, hey, Rich, I've been thinking, this whole no TikTok business, this is not going to help us. We need to change that. What would you say?
You know what? The TikTok thing, I get it. Yeah, I think what I did, the main reason I started talking was I had a couple of the upperclassmen players say, Coach, I get all these calls about my buddies saying, why are you dancing? And he said, it wasn't us, but it was in our locker room. So I said, well, I'll kind of solve that. We'll just quit doing it. And I said, if it's costing them money at TikTok, I said, I don't think so. I've seen them dance. They can't dance very good anyway. I said, I'd rather them making money playing football than dancing. But if they would come out and do something like that, might be the best dance I've ever seen, and you're going to get $100,000 because you're doing it, I'll change my mind. But until then, I hope they could just work on being good at football, and I think everybody will understand that.
Rich, you open up with Robert Morris. You go to Ohio week 2. I think that the game your fans probably have circled locally early in the calendar will be the Backyard Brawl in week 3. Have you, again, one game at a time, we know, but have you thought a little bit about maybe what a cauldron that stadium could be on a Saturday night?
9-13 against Pitt.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had noticed that, if you'd noticed the date.
The 9-13?
Yeah, 9-13. Yeah.
I'm still mad I don't know the time yet. Wait, know the time. It'll be sometime on 9-13. But now we'll. I mean, it's a great rivalry. I've always said Pitt's the worst I say way too many 4-letter words, but Pitt's the worst one. It'll be maybe the most electric atmosphere in college football in that weekend. I'm hoping that we'll have game day down there. That would be nice. I mean, they'll put on a show. You'll see the blue lot cranking like you've never seen it before, and there'll be West Virginia fans. This place will be sold out. There might be some that even go to the extreme of buying a Pitt season ticket so they could come to a West Virginia game against Pitt. So we'll see what happens with that. But no, I'm anxious to do that. I know that's a game. People say those are the games that are really easier to get your players jacked up for because they hear about it all the time, right? But you got to not just be jacked up for it. You got to be prepared to play your best too. We got some time for that.
When's the last time we were at West Virginia, Rece?
I don't think I've been to West Virginia since I've hosted the show going in my 11th year. I've been there for basketball a couple of times. I've called Thursday night games there, and we were at Pitt for West Virginia Pitt on the Thursday night a couple years ago in season open. But I don't think I've been to West Virginia for game day as a host. I'm ready to go.
I don't know who else is playing that weekend, but there will not be one that's more intense. You know what I mean? So it'll be quite a show.
I would think one of our teammates would be pretty excited if that happened, Rece, wouldn't you?
Oh my goodness! Can you even imagine? That would be such a scene. I mean, look, we already saw what the scene was when he took his show to Morgantown. You let him take his show to Morgantown and then bring game day to Morgantown on the heels of that. That would be.
Yeah, there's not a game day curfew, is there? The night before anything?
No.
I ain't checking it.
There is not. There is not. It reminds me. It reminds me of the story that Mac Brown tells about Vince Young. He had the rule that if he beat you to the bus, that you didn't play. And so he would stay in his hotel room before they left and go downstairs and said, "Is Vince on the bus yet?" And when Vince would get on the bus, and he would go. That's kind of like us with the game day curfew with McAfee. We're good. Whatever. 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, Eastern time. That's when we need it. So,
yeah, that's right. He'll be on time.
He'll always on time. He's always and prepared. Always ready to roll. Hey, Rich, great to talk with you. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and we're excited to have you back in West Virginia. It's really cool. We're excited for it and look forward to seeing you soon.
Great catching up with you. You do a great job. Appreciate you.
Pete, the most compelling thing I think of talking with Rich Rodriguez is what do you think he thought I was going to ask him when I referenced the Thomas Wolfe novel?
I didn't know. I've never read that Thomas Wolfe novel, so I didn't actually know the whys behind it. And that's actually pretty interesting. So you don't see a lot of these reunions, Rece. So that's why this one, because it was so powerful and the ending was so ugly. I mean, it was bad. Like there's no other way to say it. It was raw,
really bad. Yeah.
When it happened.
And the way it happened, and when it happened, right after the most devastating loss in the history of the program, that he. Has come to terms with and has mentioned and, made the joke about it being on 9-13. I'm sure everybody picked up on it. The score is 13-9, so that was the reference there. It's, but to come back, it fits him, man. I've always been fond of Rich. I got to know him when he was Tommy Bowden's offensive coordinator at Tulane. And, I think he's a super likable, personable guy. He's fiery for sure. He can be gruff, as a lot of coaches can. But I've always liked him, and I'm glad to see him have this opportunity to finish his career on the big stage. Some might argue in a place he never should have left, but now he gets the opportunity to do that, and I hope it goes well for him because I know he's had some issues. I know he had some issues at Arizona. Pete and I both know all of that. But I do think that I do think he's a good person, good guy, and I know he's a good coach, and I hope he has success.
Well, Rich Rodriguez has always filled your notebook. When I was a print reporter, you never left his office being like, man, I have nothing to write about. He's he's folksy yet direct. Does that make sense, Rece? And he has a little of that late career Jim Boeheim in him, where he's just not going to sugarcoat it. He's just going to say exactly what's on his mind, which we embrace the full Boeheim era of the coach's twilight.
Yeah, that's for sure. We were talking about, and I haven't been to Morgantown for college game day football. Called games there over the years when I was doing Thursday night games with Pollock and Jesse Palmer. And we've been there a couple of times for basketball. And for all of the opens that we do for football, they're not quite the same in basketball, but one of my favorites of all time happened in Morgantown with basketball. We had this, one of our producers, I believe, had this idea, would you guys be willing to sing Country Roads? And we went out on Friday afternoon and we shot the open of us walking down a literal country road. I think we started one at a time and people would join in as you kept walking by, me and Billis and Seth Greenberg and Jay Williams. And we're singing.
Greenberg sing? I just don't think Greenberg would be a very good singer.
No, none of us sing particularly.
That's fair.
None of us sing particularly
Not
well.
to pick on him in particular.
Yeah. None of us sing particularly well, but we were singing enthusiastically and seriously, not mockingly. We were not making fun. We were, paying tribute. So we're singing the song "Walking," and it's playing in the arena, the tape. And the plan was then to join the live shot. Well, when we start singing on tape, they start singing in the arena. So when our director dissolved from the tape to the live shot, it was as if you never missed a beat in the music, and the entire crowd, which was a huge crowd for basketball, they were singing Country Roads, top of their lungs. It was awesome. It was awesome. And I think it shows you the passion and the love that West Virginia fans have for their program. And I think that they're really excited about having Rich back. And man, it would be just fantastic if we could take the show back there. Might even get the boys to sing because McAfee and Saban have zero problem singing Country Roads before the show starts. If DJ Griff starts playing it, they love singing that song. So maybe we can recreate it for football.
What a powerful homecoming that would be. Nick's actual home and Pat's collegiate and adopted home at West Virginia. I think there'd be some juice on the set that morning, don't you, Rece?
I think so. Got to win some games, though. Got to win some games.
Yeah, you can't go to Athens and stub your toe.
Let me tell you this about College Game Day. We're not out there handing out participation trophies, right? You got to earn your spot.
Oh, there's no doubt.
So let's win some games. Let's win some games, and then we'll see. I have some opportunities to do that for sure. Great chat with Rich Rodriguez. A fun podcast. Pete, good to get together with you as well. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day podcast. Download this wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or subscribe, and that way you'll never miss a single episode.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains.